A farmer was shocked to find 3 babies under a yew. What the hell happened, he wondered. The sun was just beginning to stretch its first rays over the farm as Liam Harris stirred, his calloused hand instinctively reaching toward the gentle morning glow. The air was crisp, whispering with the faint scent of wildflowers and freshly turned earth, a reminder of the life he'd carefully nurtured on this land. With each breath, he absorbed the familiar silence of dawn, feeling every fiber of the farm slowly coming to life, just as he did each morning. Liam's world revolved around this place, with its predictable rhythms, the humble beauty of early mornings, and the unchanging presence of his animals, companions as loyal as any he'd ever known. After pulling on his boots, he stepped out onto the cool, dew-laden grass, making his way down to the barn. His routine was simple but sacred. Open the heavy barn doors, check the hay, and make his rounds through the animals he'd come to regard as more than livestock. They were family. As he entered, he was met by the familiar, earthy scent of straw mixed with the faint musk of wool and hide, sounds of shuffling and quiet grunts greeting him from various corners. His footsteps echoed lightly as he passed the stalls, his gaze falling softly on each creature, until finally he came upon the empty pen. Instantly, he froze. Liz was missing. His heart quickened as he called out, "Liz, come on, girl, where are you?" Liz, his beloved ewe, was nowhere to be seen. Panic crept in slowly, one beat at a time, until it quickened his every step, urging him into the field. He made his way out of the barn, scanning the open land under the morning light, now brightening with urgency, casting long shadows over the fields. And then a glimmer of white in the distance caught his eye. He saw her there, a still, woolly mound resting on the ground far from the pen. He broke into a jog, his breath fogging in the early chill as he neared her. "Oh, Liz, what did you get yourself into?" he murmured, a lump forming in his throat at the sight of her unmoving form. The ewe lay still, her once proud head bowed, as though holding on to something precious. As Liam knelt beside her, he reached out a trembling hand, his heart sinking with the thought that he might be too late. But then he felt it a soft, faint pulse, the barely there warmth of life clinging to her worn-out body. Relief washed over him, loosening his chest as he whispered, "Thank heavens, Liz, you're still here." Gently he brushed his hand over her side, feeling the thrum of her heart beating slowly, as if it were for one last, protective purpose. And then he noticed something peculiar, a bundle beneath her, small and shivering. "What on earth?" he gasped, as he gingerly lifted Liz's woolly frame. Underneath, nestled tightly, were not just one, but 3 tiny babies, their little bodies trembling in the chill. Liam's mind whirled in disbelief, barely comprehending what he was seeing. 3 infants, wrapped in a scrap of fabric, each face delicate, as if the earth itself had hidden these fragile lives away for him to find. His voice caught as he whispered, Where did you come from?" The weight of the mystery pressed on him, yet there was no time to linger on questions. In one swift movement, he shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around the 3 babies with a gentleness he hadn't realized he possessed. They were so light, each one barely heavier than a bundle of straw, yet they filled his arms with an odd, profound sense of purpose. Liz, it seemed, had guarded them through the frigid night, her own life on the line. With the babies securely nestled, Liam turned back toward the farmhouse, his heart pounding for reasons he could barely articulate. As he approached the door, he called out in a voice hoarse with shock, "Jen, get out here! You won't believe this!" He barely made it through the door before Jennifer appeared, her face puzzled and groggy from sleep, until she saw what lay in his arms. "Oh my God, Liam," she breathed, her eyes widening as her hand flew to her mouth. She took a cautious step closer. Where did they come from? Liam shook his head, still unable to make sense of it himself. I don't know, Jen, but they were out there, with Liz. He paused, feeling the weight of this discovery settle on them both. We can't leave them, Jen. They need us. Jennifer's gaze softened as she looked at the three small faces, the fragile lives, placed unexpectedly in their care. And as the morning sun fully rose, casting its light over the farm, they knew that life, as they had known it, would never be quite the same. Together, they clumsily arranged makeshift beds on the living room floor. The tiny, vulnerable forms lay in blankets, barely filling the space within their makeshift cradles. Jennifer, her hands trembling, gently reached out to touch one of the baby's cheeks. It was warm, smooth, remarkably alive despite the odds. In that still moment, something deep and unexpected took root within both of them. For years, they'd lived with the unspoken ache of a home without children, a gap that hung like a shadow across their quiet days. Liam could see it in Jennifer's eyes now, the soft spark of hope and resolve igniting, as if all those dreams long tucked away had suddenly awakened. She glanced at him, and in her gaze was a new, powerful purpose. It was as though they were holding something that had always belonged to them. The next few hours were a scramble of nervous laughter and fumbling attempts at parenting. Jennifer tried to gently clean the babies, her hands careful yet unsteady. Her awkwardness showed as she timidly bathed each child, afraid of the smallest misstep. Water splashed and she fumbled, only to let out a quiet, nervous laugh, catching Liam's amused gaze as he carefully dried each of the infants with a kitchen towel. Liam, meanwhile, had taken charge of warming the room. He rigged up an old heating lamp, aiming it just so, only to bump into it moments later, sending it teetering precariously. Jennifer gasped, hands fluttering protectively over the babies, and for a heartbeat, they both froze. Then Liam caught it, righting it just in time, and they exchanged a look of relief, amusement, and growing confidence. Maybe, Liam said softly. We're a bit rusty at this. His voice was touched with both humility and a gentle warmth, his grin lopsided but unmistakably tender. Jennifer chuckled, her laughter a release of the day's tension. A bit rusty, you say? Liam, we've never done this, but we'll learn. And though her voice held a note of uncertainty, it was also filled with resolve. That evening, as they finally settled the three babies into a soft pile of quilts and blankets by the fire, Liam and Jennifer sat close, their shoulders touching, as they watched the little ones drift into a deep, safe sleep. And yet, as they wrapped the babies in soft blankets and watched their small chests rise and fall in peaceful slumber, a question lingered, unspoken but palpable, between them. Jennifer cast a sideways glance at Liam, her voice soft, tinged with an edge of worry. Liam, she began, choosing her words carefully, we don't know anything about them, where they came from, who they are. Liam looked back at her, brow furrowing slightly. He hadn't allowed himself to wonder, to even think about it, consumed as he was by the urgency of their care. I don't know, Jen, he admitted, rubbing a hand across his face, weariness and confusion settling into his bones. But maybe we should find out. Jennifer nodded, her expression thoughtful, a hint of unease shadowing her gaze as she cradled the smallest of the children closer to her chest. Yes, Liam, she murmured softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I think we owe it to them. We need to know who they are and why they were left here, of all places. As dawn began to settle over the farm, Liam's heart was heavy, his thoughts circling back to the three helpless newborns. Where was their mother, and why had she vanished, leaving them in such a fragile state? Questions clung to him like a dense fog, tightening his chest with each passing moment. For someone to abandon her children in such a way, it just didn't make sense. It nagged at him in a way he couldn't shake off. Could she be in trouble? He thought as he stared out across the farm's sprawling fields. The thought wouldn't leave him. Determined to find answers, Liam climbed into his old pickup truck, the engine sputtering to life as he set off down the narrow dirt road. He drove slowly through the village, eyes scanning each familiar house, hoping someone might have seen a woman, possibly in distress, maybe even pregnant. Stopping at a cluster of houses by the old oak tree, he rolled down his window and called out to Mrs. Harper, the elderly woman who seemed to know every detail of village life. "Mrs. Harper," he greeted her gently. "I don't suppose you've heard of any young woman new to town, maybe seen someone who looked like she was expecting?" The old woman squinted up at him, her face etched with curiosity. "Can't say I have, Liam," she replied, glancing toward the other neighbors who had come out to listen. No word of anyone like that. Only a few new families moved into the next county, but that's a bit far for someone with a baby on the way to travel, don't you think? Liam nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. House after house, friend after friend. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. The day slipped by, and the questions nagged at him even more. Finally, as dusk began to settle in and the sun dipped below the horizon, he decided to head back. The weight of his worry was heavier now than when he'd started. Just as he was approaching the area where he'd first found the babies, something caught his attention, a faint rustling sound. He squinted out into the field of corn swaying gently in the evening breeze, shadows dancing across the narrow dirt path. The sound wasn't the wind. There was a sense of movement, of life. His heart skipped a beat, hope and dread mingling in equal measure. "Hello?" he called softly, taking cautious steps toward the field. The rustling stopped, and he held his breath, listening. After a moment, he heard it again, but softer this time, weaker, like a plea. Pushing his way through the tall stalks, Liam finally came upon her. A young woman lay in the dirt, her clothes worn and dirty, her face pale under the moonlight. She looked barely conscious, a fragile figure trembling against the cool evening air. Her breaths came out in shallow gasps, and he could see exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "Oh, my God," he murmured, crouching down beside her. "Ma'am? Can you hear me?" Her eyes flickered open, barely registering him. Her lips moved, a whisper too faint to hear. Liam leaned in closer, straining to catch her words. "Did you find them?" she rasped, her voice rough yet filled with an unmistakable urgency. Her eyes widened, glistening with the beginnings of tears. "They're alive?" Liam's throat tightened as he nodded, barely able to speak himself. "Yes, they're safe. They're all right. But why did you leave them there?" The questions slipped out before he could stop himself, but he needed to understand. The woman closed her eyes, her face contorting with grief. Her voice, fragile as it was, carried the weight of desperation. I couldn't keep going. I tried. I really did." With a trembling hand, she gestured toward her worn, ragged dress, and the thin blanket clutched to her chest. "It was so cold, I thought I'd lose them. I thought—" Her words faded, lost in a choked sob. Liam placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, gently, trying to ease her pain. "It's all right," he murmured, his own heart aching for her. "I've got them now, and they're safe. But we need to get you help, too." The woman shook her head weakly, sorrow shadowing her every move. "No, it's too late. I've done what I could. Just please promise me. Please. Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. Take care of them. Give them a life. A chance. I couldn't. Her voice cracked, a rawness that mirrored the quiet ache Liam felt deep within. He knew he could never fully understand her struggle, the battles that had brought her here, yet in this one moment he felt a kinship with her, a deep and undeniable connection through the lives of her children. As Chloe's words sank in, Liam felt the weight of her plea. Could he and his wife really do this? Could they bear the burden of raising not one, but 3 infants, with all the dreams and sacrifices that would demand? Yet when he looked into Chloe's pleading eyes, he couldn't deny her this final comfort. Liam reached out and gently grasped her hand, his voice steady yet soft. I promise you, Chloe, he said, his words firm, yet laced with a quiet, unspoken sorrow. They'll be loved. I'll make sure they're safe. I'll make sure they know you love them. A flicker of peace crossed Chloe's face, and she closed her eyes, exhaling in what seemed like relief. She squeezed his hand one last time, her grip barely more than a ghostly touch, before she surrendered to the gentle pull of eternity. Her fragile form seemed to soften, her features now a peaceful stillness that belied the torment she had endured. Liam sat there, feeling a profound sadness settle over him. The sun crept higher in the sky, casting a soft, warm glow over Chloe's face. For a moment, he remained beside her, allowing himself to mourn a woman he'd barely known, but whose story now bound him forever. He stood slowly, glancing around at the empty fields that stretched to the horizon. His gaze fell upon the distant figure of one of his neighbors, and he waved them over. A small group gathered, a few young men from the village, their faces somber as they understood what had happened. Together, they prepared a simple, heartfelt burial for Chloe, their hands working in silent reverence as they laid her to rest on the very land that had witnessed her final sacrifice. Back at the farmhouse, Liam's wife tended to the infants, rocking them gently as they lay swaddled in blankets. She could sense something had shifted within Liam when he returned. His steps were slower, his shoulders bearing a quiet weight that spoke of an unspoken promise and a heart forever marked by a final plea. Outside, the farm lay quiet, fields stretching out like empty hands reaching into the dark. But inside, a storm was building between them, one that neither of them could ignore any longer. After Chloe's heartbreaking departure, leaving them with the 3 small lives she could no longer protect, Liam had vowed to honor her last wish. I promised her, Jennifer. I told her that we'd keep them safe. All of them. His voice was low but steady, holding a quiet strength. Jennifer took a shaky breath, her fingers twisting in the hem of her worn apron. She loved those babies, no question about it, but reality felt like a weight pressing down on her, threatening to shatter the delicate peace they'd found. Liam, I love them too. But love, alone love, won't feed 3 of them, she said, voice soft but resolute. We can't pretend, Liam. Not on what we make, not with what we have right now. He shook his head slowly, looking down at his roughened hands. I know it's not going to be easy, Jen, but we'll manage. We've gotten by before, haven't we? His eyes lifted to meet hers, pleading. But we haven't had 3 extra mouths to feed before. Jennifer's voice cracked and she looked away, unwilling to let him see the worry in her eyes. Think about it, Liam. We're barely making ends meet. You know the farm's yields haven't been strong this year. How do we take care of 3 when we're already stretched so thin? There was a painful truth in her words that neither of them could deny. The farm, their home, their sanctuary, was also a place that demanded every bit of their strength, every last penny they could squeeze out of it. They'd scraped by, cutting corners, working harder than they ever thought they'd have to, and somehow they'd survived. But 3 children that was a future neither of them could see clearly. He clenched his fists, frustration tightening his jaw. We're their only family now, Jen. They've already lost one parent. We can't take away the other 2. I won't do it. Jennifer's voice rose just slightly, edged with a desperation that surprised even her. And what about us? What happens to us, Liam, when we're so buried in debt we can barely breathe? What happens when we can't give even one of them a proper life because we're so worried about making it to the next month? They both fell silent, the tension building as they sat there, each holding tightly to the world they envisioned. For Jennifer, it was a life where they could raise a single child in stability, where love wasn't the only currency keeping them afloat. For Liam, it was a life where promises were kept, where Chloe's final request was honored, no matter the cost. Neither could find a way to reach the other. After what felt like an eternity, Jennifer looked at him, her face softened with a sorrowful resignation. I know you want to keep all 3, but you have to understand, we have to think about what we can handle. We keep Alice, raise her like our own. But the other 2, they'll be cared for too, Liam. They'll be given a home and a chance. Liam's shoulders slumped, the fight slipping from his eyes, replaced by a weight of a different kind. She was right, and he knew it, but that didn't make it hurt any less. With a voice heavy with defeat, he nodded. Tomorrow, I'll take them into the city, to the orphanage. Jennifer placed a trembling hand on his, her own heart breaking in a way she could never have expected. She wished she could feel relief, but the sorrow in his eyes wouldn't let her. Together, they sat in the stillness of their decision, the house around them feeling suddenly larger, colder, more empty. They didn't speak for the rest of the night. The silence between them was loud enough to drown out the distant sound of the rain, loud enough to fill the empty rooms with a kind of quiet sorrow that neither of them knew how to voice. As dawn crept through the windows, coloring the room in shades of grey, Liam rose, moving as if on autopilot. He looked back at Jennifer, her face drawn and weary in the morning light, and gave her a small, sad nod. There were no more words left between them. As he gathered the tiny bundles in his arms, each one barely stirring, a shiver ran through him, and a silent prayer escaped his lips. Please let them be loved. Without looking back, he made his way out the door, his footsteps carrying him across the damp earth, into a world that suddenly felt far colder than any storm he'd ever known. As Liam guided the truck slowly down the narrow country road toward the downtown, the early morning fog seemed to weave itself into the heavy ache filling his chest. The 2 small, bundled bodies lay sound asleep in the back seat, oblivious to the enormity of the goodbye that was soon to come. For Liam, every mile was a moment suspended in sorrow, his fingers tight around the wheel as if trying to hold on to some last thread of his frayed heart. He stole glances at the babies through the rearview mirror, the innocence on their tiny faces mingling with the dull ache of a choice he'd never thought he'd have to make. When the orphanage finally came into view, he slowed, dread seeping into every part of him. Stopping the car, he just sat there, heart beating heavily in his chest. This place, bare walls and fenced yards, was nothing like the home he and Jennifer had made for themselves. The thought of these babies, their babies, being left in a world of strangers seemed unimaginable. Yet here he was, forced to trust the world, to show them kindness. As he carefully unwrapped each child from their blankets, he whispered in a soft, unsteady voice, "You're gonna be all right. You hear me?" His lips trembled as he spoke. You're gonna find folks who'll love you, just like we do. He knew it wasn't enough, but in this moment, it was all he could give. Placing each one in the arms of a kind-eyed caretaker, he lingered, watching as they were carried inside. He muttered a quiet prayer under his breath, a desperate plea to whoever might be listening. With a heart heavier than he'd ever known, Liam turned back to his truck and drove away, leaving pieces of himself behind on that doorstep. When Liam finally pulled into their farm, the sun had already risen, casting a soft glow across the land. The sight of Jennifer on the porch with Alice in her arms was a bittersweet balm to his aching soul. She was smiling, radiant with the happiness of holding the child they'd both longed for. Her joy was like a fresh bloom, untouched by the shadows that had claimed him. "Look at her, Liam," she beamed, eyes sparkling. "She's everything I've ever wanted." Liam managed a nod, trying to mask the weight pressing down on him. The sorrow of leaving the twins lingered like a shadow in his eyes, but he tried to focus on the sight of Jennifer cradling Alice. She held the child with a fierce devotion, a tenderness that seemed to warm the whole porch. Every day she tended to Alice with an almost reverent love, her hands gentle as she bottle-fed the little girl with milk she had freshly milked from their own sheep, the closest bond she could offer. Their days settled into a gentle rhythm, with Jennifer dedicating herself to Alice's care, her heart swelling each time the baby giggled or clung to her hand. She wrapped the child in soft blankets, humming lullabies as she rocked her to sleep, as though Alice had filled the empty spaces in their home, in her heart. For a while, there was a quiet peace. But as the days turned into weeks, that peace proved fragile. Jennifer was the first to notice. Alice's bright eyes began to dull, her little body growing too still. Her cries became weak, her appetite fading with each passing day. Panic took hold of Jennifer, the fear clawing up inside her with every night that Alice's fever refused to break. One evening, as she rocked Alice in her arms, Jennifer looked over at Liam, her face etched with worry. "Something's wrong, Liam. This isn't just a cold. She needs help." Liam nodded, the quiet anguish in his eyes mirrored her own. They knew the nearest hospital was miles away, a journey they had avoided until now, but for Alice, they would make it. The drive to the city was one of silence and stifled fears, each of them too afraid to voice the dread gnawing at them. When they arrived at the hospital, they didn't have to explain much. The nurses took one look at Alice, her flushed face and trembling little body, and rushed her in. Jennifer and Liam were led to a sterile room where they could wait, but minutes turned into hours, and the silence stretched painfully. Finally, a nurse entered the room, holding a chart, but with a soft look in her eyes as she approached them. "Mr. and Mrs. Harris," she said, her voice gentle. "Alice is stable, but we have her under close observation. There's something curious." She hesitated, searching for words. "You should know Alice isn't the only child with these symptoms tonight. We have 2 other children, twins, actually, who came in from the city orphanage just a few hours ago, both with similar symptoms." Jennifer and Liam exchanged a look. "Twins?" Liam asked, feeling a strange sense of recognition stirring. The nurse nodded. "Yes, 2 of them. They were placed together, and like Alice, they seemed inconsolable until the staff put them together in the same room." Liam felt his heart thudding heavily in his chest, a dawning sense of something beyond mere coincidence. He leaned forward, words barely a whisper. "These twins, could we see them?" The nurse looked at him curiously, then nodded. "I'll see what I can do," she replied softly, leaving them once again in the thick, anxious silence. After a few minutes, they were led down a quiet hallway to a small room where 2 cribs were set beside Alice's bed. As soon as Jennifer and Liam stepped in, they saw Alice, calm for the first time in days, lying beside 2 children who looked eerily like her. Both of the other babies, a boy and a girl, had the same faint wisps of dark hair, the same pale, soft skin. And, most strikingly, each of them was sleeping peacefully. Jennifer felt her breath catch. "Oh, my God," she murmured, clutching Liam's arm. "Look at them. They're like her." Liam's hand tightened over hers, his eyes wide with awe. "It's them," he whispered. "It's got to be. They're her siblings, Jen." Jennifer looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with a mix of wonder and disbelief. "How could this be?" she asked, her voice barely audible. At that moment, the nurse returned, noticing their astonished expressions. She smiled knowingly. "There's something special about these 3, she said gently. "We've seen children with strong bonds, but nothing quite like this. They've only just been placed side by side, and already their vitals are improving." Liam, his voice thick with emotion, glanced at Jennifer. "Jen, they're together now. I think they're supposed to stay that way." Jennifer bit her lip, her eyes drifting back to the 3 sleeping children. She thought of the journey that had led them here, the promise they'd once made. How could she deny the invisible thread that seemed to tie these 3 lives together? In that quiet hospital room, surrounded by the soft beeps of medical monitors, Jennifer and Liam realized that the choice had already been made for them. The dimly lit hospital room held an air of heavy silence, save for the occasional beep of machines nearby. Liam and Jennifer sat in chairs beside the small cribs, each holding one of the children they'd found on that fateful morning. They watched over the 3 tiny faces, breathing softly, peacefully asleep after a long battle with fever. This visit, however, was not a routine one. The doctor's words still lingered in their minds, hanging heavily. The doctor, a woman in her late 40s, with tired eyes and a soft voice, had just finished delivering an unusual diagnosis. "I'll be honest with you both," she had said, taking a seat across from them. "There's no scientific explanation for what we're seeing here. But sometimes, with children like these twins, triplets, there's an undeniable bond. It's something we can't measure or define, but it's real." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Separating them may have caused this physical reaction. Their fevers, their distress. There's a connection they share, almost as if being apart is something they physically cannot handle. Jennifer's eyes had darted over to the babies, her lips trembling. "So, you're saying they can't be apart?" The doctor looked at her, sympathy evident. "In my experience, yes. And I don't say this lightly. There are things about these kinds of bonds we don't fully understand. But one thing I've seen is that they're strong, often unbreakable." Liam took a deep breath, staring at his hands. He was a man of reason, a farmer who knew how to work with his hands, solve his problems one step at a time. But here he was, grappling with something that defied all logic. He glanced over at Jennifer, who was staring down at Alice, the one child they had kept, her tiny fist wrapped around Jennifer's thumb. As they sat in that room, the weight of the responsibility they had chosen settled even deeper into their souls. Each child was a reminder of Chloe, the young mother they'd met so briefly, but whose story had forever marked them. How can we turn our backs on them? He thought, a sense of duty swelling within him. It wasn't just about keeping a promise anymore. This was about honoring life itself. Jennifer looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I feel like we're already failing them by keeping them apart. This isn't what Chloe would have wanted." Liam's face softened, the familiar ache of their shared struggle stirring within him. He reached across, taking her hand. "You're right. I know you are. But taking on all three," his voice faltered. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. They were two ordinary people, already stretched thin financially with barely enough to get by. How could they give these children the life they deserved? Jennifer's gaze didn't waver. She squeezed his hand, a steely determination in her eyes. "Liam, we'll make it work. These babies, they're meant to be together. And somehow, I just know we're meant to be the ones who keep them that way." A wave of calm, mixed with resolve, washed over him. He knew she was right. She always had been, even from the beginning. Together they had faced hardships before, but nothing like this. And yet, he felt a strange, powerful conviction blooming within him, a certainty that these children had come into their lives for a reason, that they were, against all odds, destined to be a family. Liam rose, cradling one of the babies in his arms as Jennifer held the other two close. With a deep breath, he whispered, "Then we'll bring them home. All three. Just like we promised." Jennifer's smile trembled as she leaned in, brushing a gentle kiss over each child's forehead. The three little faces nestled against them, a quiet, contented calm settling over the room. It was as if the children, too, understood the promise being made. They walked out of the hospital hand in hand, carrying the children as the early morning light filtered through the hallway. And for the first time in a long while, the weight that had been pressing down on them seemed to lift just a little. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Financial troubles, long days of work, and sleepless nights lay before them. But in that moment, with the three children safe in their arms, none of it mattered. This was the start of something more than just a family. It was the fulfillment of a purpose they hadn't known they were waiting for all these years. And as they stepped into the sunlight, each child sleeping soundly against their chest, Liam whispered to Jennifer, "We're all together now. We're finally a family." As the days folded into months, the story of Liam, Jennifer, and the three children, the precious Alice, Rosie, and Leon, whispered through the town like a soft wind carrying a secret. Their journey had captured hearts, a tale of kindness that reminded the villagers of the bonds that held them all together. The community, touched deeply by the couple's selflessness, rallied around them. A quiet force began to gather, subtle but sure, as neighbors arrived one by one with offerings. Bags of grain, bundles of fresh vegetables, and even a lamb or two appeared on their doorstep. Folks from town brought little things, jars of preserves, hand-knitted sweaters for the kids, even little notes of encouragement scrawled in careful, earnest handwriting. Liam and Jennifer, though accustomed to managing things on their own, were humbled by the steady outpouring of help. The shared warmth that permeated each gift held something that words couldn't quite capture, something only felt, a soft hum of connectedness. Their modest farmhouse had always felt complete with just the two of them, but now, with their three children and the village behind them, it grew to feel not only complete, but full. Each day Liam worked the fields with a lighter heart. He felt the presence of every kind hand and the weight of every generous heart that helped lighten his load. Jennifer, too, found herself more at ease, spending her days with the children under the soft glow of knowing they were not alone in this world, that there were others who cared deeply in their quiet, steadfast ways. Alice, Rosie, and Leon thrived in this environment, wrapped not only in the love of their parents, but also in the boundless kindness of the villagers. Alice, with her bright eyes and quiet determination, was the curious one, always following Liam around, peppering him with questions about everything from the animals to the stars. Rosie had a nurturing spirit. She could be found caring for her little lamb, a gift from old Mrs. Peterson, who'd noticed her tenderness with animals. And Leon, with his quick smile and boundless energy, brought laughter to everyone, reminding them all of the joy and wonder of childhood. Together, the three siblings grew in love and laughter. Their bonds deepened not only by blood, but by the unwavering affection they had for each other and for their parents. There were times, quiet moments in the evening when the children were tucked into bed, that Liam and Jennifer would sit on the porch in silence, each lost in their thoughts. They knew, in a way they couldn't fully articulate, that their family had become something sacred, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the beauty that can emerge even from heartache. They had not always believed in fate, yet here it was, binding their lives with the village and tying together the threads of love and sorrow, joy and sacrifice into something profoundly meaningful. Liam looked over at Jennifer on one of those quiet nights, a knowing smile on his face. "We've come a long way," he said softly. Jennifer reached out, taking his rough hand in hers. "We sure have. And we're not alone. Not anymore." In the town, people began to speak of the family with a gentle reverence. For many, the little farmhouse, with its simple white walls and blue shutters, became a symbol. It was the place where love had triumphed, where three children who might have been lost were instead found, nurtured, and surrounded by an entire village's affection. Years would pass, and the children would grow up, leaving their own marks upon the world. But the story of Liam and Jennifer, and the three little ones who had entered their lives one cold night, would remain. It would be whispered from one generation to the next, a reminder that even in the quietest of places, miracles could be born, and that in the end, love would always find a way. And that their story isn't just about family, it's about resilience, kindness, and the strength we find in each other, even in the most unexpected of places. So, let me ask you, if you were in their shoes, would you have made the same choice? Let's talk about it in the comments below. If this story touched your heart as much as it did ours, go ahead and hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more amazing stories just like this one. And hey, share this video with someone who could use a little reminder of the power of love and community. Thanks for watching, and as always, take care, stay kind, and we'll see you in the next video.